Good afternoon and welcome to the Brand Storytelling live streams for Wednesday, April 8th, 2020. I'm Rick Parkhill, and along with all of us here at Brand Storytelling, we'd like to say thanks for joining the conversation. We'll be producing new shows every Wednesday with the intent of delivering you timely, relevant topics with insightful hosts and guests. I hope you'll enjoy the program we have for you today, and please let us know what you'd like produced for the future, and if you might like to get involved yourself, just email me. I'm Rick at BrandStorytelling.tv. It's Rick at BrandStorytelling.tv. Let me know what you'd like to hear. Purpose and action is top of mind for brands at this moment, and we have a terrific group of guests for this discussion that will be led by award-winning journalist and brand storytelling contributor and advisor, Fara Warner. Fara, screen's all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Rick. It's my pleasure to be here today, and I'd like to introduce the guests quickly, and then we'll move to our conversation. So we have Andrew Strickman, SVP and Head of Brand and Chief Creative at Realtor.com. We have Brian Newman, founder of Subgenre, who consults on content development, distribution, and marketing, and has worked on films for Patagonia, REI, IBM, and many more. We have Dina Capiello, who is the EVP and Editorial Director at Edelman, DC, who recently Edelman did their Brand Trust and the Coronavirus Pandemic special report, so we'll talk about that. And we also have Edward Cotton, who runs his own consulting company, helping clients and agencies and others solve strategic problems and find new opportunities. He was a partner and chief strategic officer at BSSP, before leaving and running his own consulting company. So let's start. At Brand Storytelling, we were already beginning our research for the Elevate conference before the global pandemic became our new reality. We knew we wanted to continue the research begun last year with the Harris Poll, commissioned by Soul Pancake and Brand Storytelling, on the rise of impact entertainment. We were working on a field guide for how brands can create and deliver purpose-driven brand storytelling that makes a difference, not just simply raising brand awareness. We are continuing that research at a time when purpose has taken on a much more important and poignant meaning for all of us. Today, we'll be discussing the many facets of purpose-driven storytelling, both as it relates to the world we all live in today and in the future. We'll discuss how brands must, quote, solve, not sell, in the words of Richard Edelman, to quote from Dina in our pre-conference call yesterday, both today and in the future. We'll talk about how our audiences look to brands for transparency and information, not a product pitch. We'll focus on the power of owned media, not just solely social or paid media. And we'll discuss how nothing will ever be the same again in purpose-driven storytelling. And finally, we'll end with a comment from each of us on what brands we think are rising to the challenge of our times, the global pandemic. We'll also be taking questions from the audience if we have time, so put those into the chat window and we'll do our best to get started, and we do our best to get to them. I'd like to begin with Andrew Strickman to discuss Realtor.com's new advertising campaign focused on the meaning of home, how it was created, and how the team brought purpose and action together to make meaning at a time when we all feel deeply about the homes we're sheltering in. Andrew, I'm going to give you the floor to talk to us about just how this all came together.
Sure. Thank you, Fara and Rick and the other panelists. I'm really excited to be here. I think that when we began thinking about our marketing in sort of the face of this global pandemic, it really started when we closed our first set of offices at the beginning of March, our office in the Bay Area and our office in Vancouver, Canada. And we were forced very, very quickly within literally 48 hours to go from a very, very engaged employee base in those offices to being completely distributed and set off into this sort of new world of working from home in a forced way. And as those office closures began to cascade to our other offices around the country and the entire nation started moving to a very different way of working. We recognized how important home had become in very different ways than we normally think about it. Clearly, home is sort of at the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, shelter. But I think that all of the different ways, from a place to work, to a place to teach our children, to a place to watch children, to a place to work out, all of those things became much more crystallized. And so as we were looking at all the marketing that we had out in the marketplace, much of which is driven by humor, we realized that some of it probably wasn't appropriate at this time. And so we started pulling pieces of our content off of TV and out of the digital sphere. But it also gave me a moment to start thinking about, well, if we're not out there being funny and trying to sell our brand and trying to market ourselves right now, I do still think we have a role to play in the overall discussion of what home is and what home means. And so I started working with our creative agency, with our internal creative team, to develop what became known internally as the Manifesto, which was a written manifesto that we decided to run in a number of newspapers around the country, starting with the Wall Street Journal last Monday, and then rolling out to every major newspaper in the markets where we had offices. It was a very, very fast to market concept. It went through many rounds of revisions. There were a number of things that were sort of included in our brief, including this was not about us, this was about home, and this was about the shared experience that we as Americans were all faced together. We pulled all of the sort of normal things that you would expect to see in a brand advertisement, whether in print or in video. We got rid of most of the brand marks around our logo. We pulled any reference to any sort of campaign taglines from early versions of the idea that was shared by the agency. And we worked together to launch this thing. And it was a very, very meaningful thing for us to do, in part because of our relationship to the home ownership and home world of home. But it was also meaningful because we as a company had never taken such a major step to not only recognize what was going on in the world, but to actually put our money where our mouth was. Part of the rollout of this ad included a $100,000 donation to Feeding America to help support those most in need. And so it was something that we were very proud of, and something that was somewhat new for us, but has really been a rallying cry for our employees, who are all very proud of what we are doing, and also for the market at large.
Great, thank you, Andrew. I'd love to shift to Edward Cotton, because in our discussions, Ed, around purpose-driven storytelling, you and I talked a lot about the importance of messages, purpose-driven messages, actually being linked to action. I wonder if you can talk about sort of the importance of that it can't be solely about the message, and particularly right now, the message might actually be the last thing that we we should be thinking about. It really should be the action.
Yeah, Fara, thanks. Yeah, I think just to follow the trajectory of brand purpose from a history perspective, I mean, what started off as corporate social responsibility kind of drifted into purpose. When the millennials arrived, everyone started doing the surveys, understanding that millennials were a huge audience and that they wanted more from brands and companies. So purpose became the thing. We then got to this sort of moment where Saturday Night Live started spoofing purpose because it was ostensibly, in many cases, hollow. There'd been the exception. Dove had run a self-esteem fund for women from day one, but they were the exception to the rule. And I think recently, companies have recognized that actions have to be central to a purpose. Procter & Gamble, for example, insists that every brand has its own purpose statement, but not just a purpose statement, that purpose statement can be directly connected to an action for that specific brand. So right onto now, I think the issue is, if you look at it, and this is very simplistically, we're in a war on two fronts. We're in a health war, and we're going to be, and we are already in an economic war. So brands, companies, corporations need to step up. It's kind of like, I remember my grandparents back in England talking about the war effort. The war effort, it meant something. What did your company do in the war? What did you do in the war? And I think consumers are increasingly going to be asking companies and brands what they are doing specifically. And so the actions are more important than ever. What are you doing for the healthcare infrastructure, for the healthcare workers? What are you doing for those who are getting the greatest impact out of the economic fallout, whether that's the hungry, the homeless, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, action is more important than it's ever been, and it will continue to be a core part of the purpose piece of storytelling.
Thank you, Edward. I'd love to shift to Dina, because I think, Dina, at Edelman, you recently did a quick survey. It was great reading it around brand trust and the coronavirus. I wonder if you could take us through the insight that you were seeing in there, particularly this point of view that audiences, our consumers for brands, have big expectations of us right now, that we are in this, we are doing what we need to do to support the frontline healthcare workers and support our employees, and that the message comes after. So Dina, I'd love you to, if you take us through the research that Edelman just did.
Yeah, I would love to. And thanks so much for having me, and Ed for teeing me up, because that was a great segue. And Fara, I'm not going to forgive you for taking the soundbite that I love, which is solve, don't sell. Anyway, yeah, I mean, listen, what we found out through our trust barometer, which we do broadly, as everybody probably knows on the call every year, is we focused it on COVID, which is our new reality. And what it found is that the vast majority of people surveyed, and this was global, really want brands and companies to step in to fill a void, both in action and in trust by government. So there's a real distrust, and I think we're seeing that in real time, day in and day out, on the government's response. And they are looking, as they have in the past, in other issues, whether it's climate change, other social issues, for brands to step up and step up broadly. So beyond solve, don't sell, which I just absolutely love. And, you know, storytelling from its genesis has always been about problem solution, right? As an ex-reporter, you're an ex-reporter, Fara, too. You know, good stories are problems. So, you know, I've always advised my clients to figure out how to get into the conversation by finding a solve. But right now, it has to be extremely authentic. It just can't be kind of newsjacking. It can't just be traditional CSR in communities. It has to kind of align with what their brand has always been about, and has to be in their lane. And if they don't have a lane that really is or dovetails to COVID, then I think kind of, you know, all rules kind of go away. The other thing that we found that I thought was fascinating is in kind of what to communicate is people want to hear from brands and companies empathy and compassion, followed by facts. They want to have a sense that you are with it in this together, that you understand their plight, whether that is the health plight, if they're one of those at-risk groups, or the economic plight, if they're one of the people, the millions of people that are unemployed, or the working parent plight, for that matter, in terms of all of us struggling to be working at home and educating our children. And then in terms of where they kind of want to see these messages and these stories. And for me, I always, you know, message to me is a tell and story is a show. So there's that conversion, which really kind of, I think, goes towards action. Media, first and foremost, we're seeing an explosion in TV viewership, lots of specials on this, which, you know, they weren't doing well prior to this. People have a lot more time to spend in their houses, followed by owned people and brands telling their stories directly to their audiences. And then in terms of social, it kind of gets really interesting. The results from a variety of different outlets show that Facebook is really where the predominant COVID conversation is happening. It's just all over the place. Whereas Twitter is kind of a hodgepodge right now. And also, but Facebook is definitely predominant, and that's what people said they wanted. It was on Facebook. And then in terms of what we talk, about when, we're getting deluged, all of us, by COVID content, whether it's in ads on our Facebook feed, whether it's on the news, whether you name it. And I think it's really important, again, when we talk about those solutions, to look at what is trending. What are those problems that are going to be popping up? Right now, we're kind of in the heat of it, and we're talking about sickness and peaks and death tolls and hospital beds. But as this evolves, what are those problems and the fallout from this going to be? And as those pop up, those are really opportune times for brands and companies to talk about what they're actually doing.
Great, thank you, Dina. Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a friend in the financial sort of space today, and we were talking around how, where would financial companies sort of fit in here, and financial literacy really came out as a core issue, because as we come out of the intense healthcare crisis, we're going to move into an economic crisis. Andrew, I want to move to you just quickly before moving to Brian, because we had a question from our audience. The question comes from Karen Vernon. It might be too early to tell, but did you see a difference with awareness of your message without your logos or any brand marks?
Yeah, I saw Karen's message in the chat. I wanted to just clarify that we did, the logo remained on the print piece, but very small in the corner. We really did not want to be the story. And our awareness tracking is done on a quarterly basis. And so honestly, the effort was not meant to raise awareness or change awareness for who we were. It was more us wanting to sort of put our beliefs out there, hopefully our shared beliefs with others in the country. I'm certainly happy to show the piece right now if you want, Fara, but we can also move on.
Yeah, maybe toward the end we can. I want to move to Brian, because I actually think that this is a really interesting discussion around transparency and brand awareness and purpose for the long term. So one of the things that we saw in our earlier research last year for the rise of impact entertainment is that most brands did impact entertainment or purpose-driven storytelling for brand awareness. That was their top priority. It was the reason they did it. Much, much further down was actually positive action on the issue that they were focused on, whether it's climate and environment, or social justice, economic justice. Brian, I want to turn to you, because you've written about transparency and the importance of brands being transparent when they're doing purpose-driven storytelling, and also been really there with brands who take a specific role in society. So I'm wondering if we can move to you and talk about this importance of transparency and purpose storytelling for the long term, not just right now.
Sure. I think that transparency is key. And so it's good that Realtor's logo is on there, because people need to know where the message is coming from. And it's really about, how does this issue that you're now taking a stand on tie to your core values as a brand? And it really needs to be authentic and come from the DNA of the brand. And so I think consumers probably always felt this, and it was a rising concern in the last few years. But now, post-crisis, I think that everyone's bullshit meters are up pretty high, and people want to know, what are you really doing in this space? And are you just purpose washing, or is this something that's core to your company? And so I think it's going to be really important for companies that are moving into this space to stay true to their DNA and things that are core to their business, and they're transparent about it, and they really integrate what they're doing and what their interests are throughout the story. So it doesn't matter if their logo is there, because in watching it, you should get a sense that it really fits that brand to a T. So even pre-COVID, I think a good example of this was P&G with a Great Big Story and their film, The Words Matter. It was very clear that that was about the brand, and they weren't hiding that, but it was also clear that they were doing this for reasons that were greater than the brand, and they didn't sugarcoat or cover up anything about their brand's history. and they were really front and center with how this attached to their brand. And I think consumers today and viewers are going to demand that as we move forward. And so it's even more incumbent upon us to be transparent about this.
Great, thank you, Brian. Yeah, I think I want to shift back to you, Andrew, to talk about this, because it was interesting. As you mentioned, Realtor hadn't really done purpose-driven storytelling in the past, or even purpose. These are very traditional ads. Do you feel like we are changed forever in the way that we think about home now? I mean, is there a point when you return to those more humorous campaigns, or is it too early to tell?
I'm not sure it's too early to tell, and I certainly don't want to project out what something might look like a year or 2 years from now. I think that as a brand, humor has been one of our sort of brand traits that has set us apart in a competitive marketplace, and so I'm not sure we would ever leave that behind. But I hope that what this effort allowed us to do was show that we were something more than just a funny brand, and we clearly believe in the mission that we have to help everyone find a home that's right for them. And I think that it's even changing how we are looking at the rest of the year. We had a campaign that we were about to put into production when the pandemic sort of shut everything down. And in the time since, beyond the work that we've released in the last week or so, we're thinking about how we can carry a thread of that belief structure through what I would consider an interim campaign that might take us through the end of the year, even once things start to go back to normal, and people start to get out and about, and things like open houses continue on. How can we honor what everybody has gone through in the context of the fact that people are still going to be interested in buying and selling homes? And so we're having a deep think about that right now, and the work I've seen in the last week from our team is really, really good, and I'm very excited to put more of that out there into the world. I would consider it more traditional marketing, but with an acknowledgement of this new experience that we've all had together.
Thank you, Andrew. Ed, I want to shift to you, because in our conversation even yesterday, this concept of a return to normal, a pivot back, where do we go next? I think we're all there. In some ways, I go back and forth every day on feeling hungry for the world to get back to the way it was, BC, as we're hearing. But that I, in fact, generally think that everything will be changed by what we're going through. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, because you spoke about it quite eloquently the other day, that we're not going back to the way it was.
That was the other day. I wonder if I can repeat that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, what's interesting is, no one knows exactly what's going to happen. This is a perfect world for the speculator, for the futurist, to try and make some educated guesses. And my suggestion is that companies really think about scenarios versus binary. Right? It's not a 1 or a 0, it's scenarios. If you take a look at what Germany has done, and Germany has actually put a plan together for the return, something we haven't done here yet in the US. And what that plan suggests is some kind of midpoint. You are still going to have social distancing. You are still going to have to wear masks. So, it's not like someone's going to flip a switch and the world's going to go back to normal. We're going to go through a process. And, if, touch wood, it doesn't happen, but if it comes back in the fall or winter, then we are looking at, a different scenario. That's another scenario to plan for as you make your plans. But I think what's important now is that companies use data, they use consumer insight, and they try and work out what's going on and what they can do. It's just on a conversation with an agency who has packaged goods clients. They can't believe how successful they are. The brands that were written off, the soup brands, etc., who And now, well, what do they do to capitalize on the fact that now become a core essential in the family? The other thing I think is important is when we look at purpose, what is happening here is we're part of a massive global social experiment. I would add into the next phase for people to look at is what's happening in the developing world. It is going to hit the developing world like a mallet. It's going to be really extreme. People can't social distance. If you live in a shanty town, you can't social distance. If you get paid a few dollars an hour, you have to go to work. You don't have a choice. So it's going to be interesting to see how people global companies balance up their global care, developing world efforts with their efforts inside the United States. Plus, take a look at what's happening. Things like the education system, really exposed right now, the digital divide, really exposed in terms of the Hispanics and African Americans apparently disproportionately suffering from COVID more than other populations. Things like domestic abuse. So really think about not just scenarios, as I talked about, potential scenarios, but also impacts. Who's impacted? What can you do as a purpose-based organization with purpose-based storytelling, with actions and efforts to help in some of those things, some of those areas which are being exposed, and to some of those populations that are being exposed.
Great. Thank you, Ed. I was going to go to Dina, but I actually want to bring Brian into the conversation. Brian, you've worked with a lot of companies that for much of their history are driven by purpose. I'm wondering if you can tell us sort of from where you sit, how companies should be thinking about some of the things that Ed brought up is like, our world is going to be deeply impacted about this, and how should brands think about it, particularly from your perspective, because you've worked with brands who already have been thinking about these topics.
Yeah, I think it's been true for those brands that were thinking about this before, but when Ed was speaking, it just reminded me even more so that the brands that are doing this stuff right, and filmmakers, not even brands, that work in the impact space, trying to have an impact to their films, over time have learned that awareness raising isn't good enough. It needs to be tied to action, as we've all been implying here. And the best way to do that usually is to partner with nonprofit groups that are already on the ground doing that work. And so a brand may be funding those groups or be involved in that activism or bringing awareness to it, but there's almost every issue that Ed just mentioned, and all the ones we can think of are things that have activist groups that are experts on this issue, and those are the perfect partners to go to. So when you're making a film or a short form piece about this and raising awareness, what's really important is that you partner with those groups and drive traffic to those groups that are doing the work and that can do good, because that can amplify the message. It also lends more authenticity to your cause. And so when I was working with Patagonia, which is a really good poster child for impact entertainment, every project they do, they partner with a nonprofit that is working on the ground and is getting something done. And so there's never just a film, there's always an action campaign that's in partnership with experts who know what they're doing.
Great. Yeah. And Dina, I think you can pick up on this well, because we talked about this, and it's also talked about in Brand Trust, is it's really about, it isn't the message right now. It is the action.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting, and I completely agree on the nonprofit groups, is what we found in the Brand Trust survey around coronavirus was really people want to hear from experts. And first and foremost was, the health and doctors and Fauci on the front line to really, really understand this. And right behind that was maybe brand SMEs that could apply that knowledge in a new way, followed by then the CEO who employers want to work with. I think what's also really interesting about what Brian said is you know, the Patagonias of the world, the REI, which was also a client of Edelman's. These are brands that have had an audience that has called for that purpose, right? And although we've always talked about purpose at Edelman, and that's kind of Richard Edelman's, you know, he talks about it all the time. I think that what's so interesting about COVID is that it has been an awakening for some brands where that's not a natural way to go. Brands that haven't done a lot of experimenting in the owned brand storytelling space, that are more traditional, kind of very product forward, PR newswire, kind of get the word out, hope it sticks. And I think what this is creating for them is a moment to say, we can do this in a different way because this is not going away. The world is changing permanently, and we have to reevaluate how we are communicating as a brand. And I think that's going to stick. And I think that's going to stick, you know, well beyond COVID, because I think that, you know, as numerous people on this call have pointed out, it's a new day.
Dina, that's great. I have a question actually that from our audience that's interesting, and open this up to anyone who wants to answer. It's from Sarah Butros. Given that our main purpose during this time is to help consumers and to help solve, not sell, how are we adjusting how we measure success for brands? Are we even in a world where we should be thinking about the success or the metric for what we did during this time?
I'm going to jump in with the negative. One of the things that we're already seeing is people are coupling that. And if you're not doing something about this, about solving for insert their ill, then people are aborting those brands. So, you know, while the motivation may not be to sell things, I think the measurement is really brand loyalty, and people coming back and maybe not buying the thing, but interacting with the brands in the authentic way. And from the content perspective, I am looking at not just, you know, really deep engagement with what we're putting out there during this time.
Anybody else want to jump in?
I'll just say that now is a good time to have that measurement be around impact. And is what you're doing having an impact? And so measuring how many people are donating to a cause or participating in a petition or whatever that activity may be, if you're authentic and really want people to make a difference, then you should be measuring that impact. And you can worry about how you signal later on that worked at a later date. And you can worry about things like, does that accrue to your brand? It probably will, if you're being authentic and truly trying to have an impact. And so I think now's the time to shift some of those measurements away from just awareness to, are we making people take action?
Yeah, I also just wanted to add that I think in many cases, the success of brands is going to be, can they keep their business afloat, right? I think that everyone is in that type of crisis mode, but hopefully alongside feeling that sense of crisis and thinking about, can we afford all our employees? Can we continue to try to do business in the way that we are able? Hopefully there is room with companies of a certain size or a certain set of values that they can continue to be part of this conversation around how we help those who are less fortunate and how we get through this together.
Great. That segues really well into sort of a question and what I'm seeing in some ways as a conundrum, if you will. Adam Nunn is asking, with the financial pressure coming post COVID-19, do you think businesses will cut their budgets to departments that do purpose-driven storytelling? And is there a way to deliver value with these lower budgets? I think the question there is, you know, we're talking about purpose right now, but purpose-driven storytelling in the future, will we even have budgets to be able to address these ills? Will we see any shifting of marketing dollars? Anyone?
I'm seeing right now with several of my clients, actually, that this crisis has shown to the CMO, to the CCO, the value of purpose brand storytelling, where the people I have worked with have really felt they were swimming upstream in the organization by telling purpose-driven stories. And now their leadership is saying, wow, we kind of get what you were doing, and doubling down on that. So whether that is temporal and lasts beyond this, but I've seen just from my clients kind of this, wow, it's taken this new reality to say that what we do is important and what we do matters for the brand.
I could add something here if you want. I think we need to be creative. You know, a lot of these big organizations own a lot of media. They own vans. They have hundreds of thousands of employees. All these things can be put to good use, and on behalf of purpose. So it's not necessarily about millions of dollars, billions of dollars. It's about how you creatively apply the resources you have access to. That could be food at cost. It could be employees. It could be all kinds of things. So I'm hoping that a budget cut doesn't mean that you step away from this.
Great. I think that segues great to a question from Alicia Ontiveros. Hi, Alicia. It's nice to see you on here. She says, I see a global consciousness forming that prioritizes collaboration over competition and sharing over stockpiling for individual gain. Do you think this will encourage brands to cooperate with each other and develop partnerships? You know, and is this more broadly changing like our view of capitalization and market share domination? Any thoughts around partnership and collaboration instead of competition?
Yeah, I think it's the best time now for brands to make the case that they can work with certain colleagues in their field to have a bigger impact together about things that they care about. And I'd like to point out, yesterday Ed brought this up on our conversation, so he may have something to add to it as well. But the fact is that if you're a brand in certain categories, oftentimes you look at everyone else as competitors, but a lot of times you're sharing an interest in things like climate change or other social issues. And all of these groups, all of these brands would have a greater impact working together. And especially in the branded content space and in a time when no one can begrudge anyone for cutting budgets, it's a time to look to those collaborations to have a bigger impact, maybe with a little bit less spend.
Yeah, I think, you know, thanks, Brian. I think, you know, what I was talking about yesterday was really that the cumulative combined, or the combined impact of people joining together, whether it's soft drink manufacturers, Coke and Pepsi and others, versus individual efforts. So I think we might see some of those institutions that are very DC lobbying focused actually work together on other initiatives around purpose. So I think that could be interesting. The other thing is, I think we might see the rise of global non-for-profits. I read just now that Lady Gaga has already got 35 million from companies for a live stream concert that's going to be massive. It's going to be the equivalent of a sort of a Live Aid. And Global Citizen is the banner. It's not coming to you from Procter & Gamble, Unilever, and Patagonia. It's Global Citizen. So you become a sponsor of Global Citizen.
And all the media networks have agreed to broadcast it together instead of competing.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. So that might be another a way that we see collaboration through these large non-for-profit institutions.
Great. So we've got about 5 minutes, and Rick had asked us all to, is there a brand, a company that you feel like is showing great strength in the purpose work that it's doing, the action that it's taking? Ed, I'm going to throw it to you first because you had a good one. So we'll kind of do a quick round around this, and then if anybody else has any more questions, please drop them in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Fara. Yeah, I was on a call with someone in Europe this morning, and they said, "Do you know what Mercedes is doing in Germany?" And I said, "No." Well, they haven't stepped back from their media spend. They're keeping their media spend as it was. They're just not advertising their cars. They're donating all of their media spend to causes, information messages, even to the government. So I think that's kind of like, I haven't heard anyone doing that here. It's pretty incredible. It's like right at the top for me. Obviously, Nike just announced today that have developed a face mask that they're using in Oregon hospitals, which is incredible. And there are countless others who are really, putting their best feet forward to help in the healthcare war. But the Mercedes thing I thought was pretty incredible in terms of not pulling back on their media spend and just donating it instead.
Brian, let's jump to you. A brand that you are looking to right now that you think is doing great action.
Well, I'll point out someone a little bit different than the normal brands. It is a brand, but Kickstarter, which is another B Corp, which is doing a program called Inside Voices, which is really encouraging people to think about collaborative creativity. And they're using their internal resources to really push these projects and help them raise money for people creating together while they're stuck at home and doing something interesting and new.
That's a nice one. Dina, what about you? A favorite brand?
We're really going to kind of really throw it out there and do something totally different too. So I work with a lot of brands and companies that are really essential businesses. So they're not working from home. They are doing what they always do, and they can't shut down because they provide essential products. So one is a very big shipping company who obviously is really busy right now because they shipping all the boxes to our front door. It's not Amazon. Telling stories that are purposeful in this space when you are doing your day job, I think is really challenging, but they are really being a logistics coordinator for not only the government, but for hospitals. And one of their hubs and we're about ready to tell this story, so I'm kind of giving it away here, but it's really become like the epicenter of PPE, ventilators, mobile hospitals within the United States. And so literally offering kind of logistical support and changing kind of what they've always done to apply to this. The second is not a client, is ExxonMobil, an industry like the oil and gas industry with oil prices, with the lack of people driving, is facing a lot of financial headwinds now. Again, an essential business. They're not going to stop producing fuel. They're not going to stop producing petrochemicals. But I think Exxon has done a really great job at communicating the things that they produce, that behind the scenes, that aren't visible, that are really essential to fighting this, whether that is the alcohol that goes into hand sanitizers, whether that's the polyesters that go into N95 masks, and talking about the demand and working to make those processes better and more efficient, and increasing the volume. And I think that's a twofold purpose, right? It is solving the problems that people are worried about, which is a lack of these things right now available to our first responders. And second of all, it is also educating people about what your purpose is as a brand.
Great, thanks, Dina. And Andrew, how about you? A brand that you're looking to?
I took a little different spin on it too. It's actually someone who's done some remarkable work to, I think, reestablish a positive personal brand. You know, Jack Dorsey yesterday, the CEO of Twitter and Square, pledged $1 billion to support other organizations' efforts to help fight the pandemic. And what he said was, you know, until that money runs out, it's there. And if we can get past this before that money is spent, the rest is going to go to, I believe, to philanthropies that are helping support female empowerment and girl empowerment.
That's great. So I would say there are a number of companies for me. I've been, Unilever, as Brian mentioned, Dove has been, a long time sort of in purpose, but I really liked Unilever's decision to set aside $500 million for small suppliers, understanding obviously that it's doing that to because it will need to keep supplies moving, but really understanding that supply chain. And then the other one that I've, just recently, I use Airtable for a lot of my projects and sort of keeping information collated. And they've made their Airtable Pro free for humanitarian groups working on COVID-19 relief efforts. So everything from Project N95, which is coordinating delivery of those masks to hospitals, to making information repositories for local communities so that they can, like Curbside KC is helping Kansas City businesses by making a database of local restaurants for takeout and delivery options. And what's really cool is many of these nonprofits and humanitarian groups are making their data open source so other people can jump into that. I know we're almost at time, Rick, so I will let you close this out and turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Fara, and thank you to all the panelists. I'd just like to add, another group of brands that I think are just doing such admirable work, and that's all the grocery chains right now. Go into any market and look at what those people are doing to keep the food supply chain working and the risks that all those people are taking on the front lines every day. Those brands are really stepping up and doing the work that we all need. So listen, I appreciate the panel very much. Fara, all of our guests, thank you for your time. I'd like to remind everybody on the call that we're going to be doing these shows every Wednesday. We're wide open to your ideas and what we do next, or even if you'd like to host or be a guest, please email me your ideas. I'm Rick at BrandStorytelling.tv. We have another very timely show coming up in just 10 minutes. That'll be hosted by Wendy Shea. And what do you do about productions when your production crews are grounded? We've got some great guests there, a couple of brands. We have Grubhub and Harry and David. So join us at 1 o'clock Pacific for that show. You need to go to BrandStorytelling.tv and click on streams to join it. It'll be a different stream. And I hope to see you there. And thanks again, Fara, and all of our guests. Really great discussion. Thank you very much.